after Rachel and Daniel Warren miraculously found their missing daughter, Eugene, thanks to a Google Maps image. They hoped she could heal from her ordeal. But the parents soon faced the harsh reality that during the 2 years she was gone, their daughter had endured horrors no child her age should ever face. The fight for justice was far from over, and their family's strength and faith would be tested once again, putting them in danger all over again. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful day in New York when Rachel and Daniel had found their daughter Eugene after 2 years of desperate searching. Now back in their modest home in Pine Hollow, Idaho, the three of them sat in their living room alongside Dr. Amelia Harding, the child psychologist assigned to Eugene's case by the state authorities. The soft-spoken woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes watched Eugene carefully as the 10-year-old girl fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. Eugene had changed in the 2 years she'd been gone. Her once long hair was now cut to her shoulders, and there was a weariness in her eyes that broke Rachel's heart. "Eugene, do you feel comfortable sharing anything more about your time with Mr. Lanton today?" Dr. Harding asked gently, using the real name of the man who had posed as Evangelist Matthew. Eugene shook her head slightly, staring down at her. "Hans, not today," she whispered. Rachel exchanged a worried glance with Daniel. 3 weeks of therapy sessions, and Eugene still struggled to open up about what had happened during those 2 long years. The psychologist had advised patience, explaining that trauma took time to process, especially for children. But patience was difficult when the legal case against Derek Lanton hung in the balance. "That's perfectly fine, Eugene," Dr. Harding assured her. "Remember what we talked about? You set the pace. There's no rush." Rachel tried to hide her disappointment. Without Eugene's testimony, they couldn't be certain that Derek Lanton would face the full consequences of his actions. The evidence they had proved kidnapping, but Rachel and Daniel suspected much worse had occurred during those 2 years, something that Eugene and the other children were too traumatized to reveal. The ringing of the phone broke the uncomfortable silence. Daniel glanced at the caller ID and stood quickly. "It's Officer Marshall Lawson," he said, excusing himself. "I need to take this. It's about the case." As Daniel stepped into the kitchen to take the call, Rachel tried to refocus on the conversation between Dr. Harding and Eugene. The psychologist was showing Eugene a drawing technique to express feelings without words, and for a brief moment, Rachel saw a flicker of interest in her daughter's eyes. But her attention kept drifting to Daniel in the kitchen. His brow was furrowed, his posture tense. Whatever news Officer Lawson was sharing, it wasn't good. Rachel felt her stomach tighten with dread. Dr. Harding seemed to notice Rachel's distraction. "Eugene, why don't you try this exercise while I have a quick word with your mom?" she suggested, handing Eugene a sketch pad and colored pencils. As Eugene began to draw, the psychologist moved closer to Rachel. "Mrs. Warren, I know you're anxious about the legal proceedings, but it's crucial that Eugene doesn't feel pressured to talk before she's ready," she whispered. "Pushing too hard could cause her to retreat further." Rachel nodded, watching as Eugene meticulously selected a dark blue pencil. "I understand. It's just, what if they let him go because we don't have enough evidence?" "One step at a time," Dr. Harding counseled. "Eugene's healing has to come first." Daniel returned to the living room, his face ashen. He hung up the phone and took a deep breath before speaking. "That was Officer Lawson," he said, his voice strained. "Derek Lanton was released from prison yesterday morning." Rachel jumped to her feet, forgetting the psychologist's warning about maintaining calm for Eugene's sake. "What? How is that possible? He kidnapped our daughter." Daniel held up his hands, trying to quiet her. "The judge ruled that he wasn't an immediate threat. The officer said they'll continue building the case, and Lanton will likely face prison time eventually." "But what?" Rachel demanded, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it. "The evidence they have right now isn't strong enough to keep him in pretrial detention," Daniel explained, his voice low and tight. "Apparently his lawyer threatened lawsuits because of the lack of concrete evidence." "That's ridiculous," Rachel exclaimed. We found Eugene in his care after she was missing for 2 years. How is that not enough evidence? Daniel moved closer, placing a hand on her arm. The officer said Lanton isn't just an ordinary evangelist. He has influence, money, resources. His lawyer is arguing that the children were part of a legitimate ministry program and that Eugene was never reported as missing in their records. Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. That's a lie. We filed missing person reports everywhere. Dr. Harding cleared her throat softly, drawing their attention to Eugene, who had stopped drawing and was watching them with wide, frightened eyes. Is he coming back for me? Eugene asked, her voice barely audible. Rachel rushed to kneel beside her daughter, taking her small hands in her own. No, sweetheart. No one is taking you away from us ever again. I promise. Daniel joined them, his arm encircling Eugene's thin shoulders. Officer Lawson assured me that Lanton is under house arrest with a GPS tracker. He can't come anywhere near us. They should have kept him locked up, Rachel muttered, anger and fear coursing through her veins. He's obviously a danger. Daniel nodded, his expression grim. We just need more evidence. We need to keep working with Dr. Harding, and hopefully in time. His eyes met Rachel's over Eugene's head, and the unspoken message was clear. They needed their daughter to tell the truth about what had happened during those 2 years. Without her testimony, the case against Derek Lanton might fall apart completely. As Dr. Harding prepared to leave, Rachel tried to compose herself to project a strength and confidence she didn't feel. The idea that the man who had stolen 2 years of their daughter's life was now free, even under house arrest, filled her with a cold, creeping dread. Whatever Derek Lanton had done, whatever awful secrets Eugene wasn't ready to share, Rachel was convinced of one thing. The man who had posed as evangelist Matthew was dangerous, and as long as he was free, none of them were truly safe. Rachel accompanied Dr. Harding to the door, thanking her profusely for all her help with Eugene's recovery. They stood on the porch for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. I really think we're making progress, the psychologist said, adjusting her glasses. Eugene's drawings are revealing trauma patterns consistent with emotional manipulation. But there are signs of resilience, too. Rachel glanced back at the house where she knew Daniel was sitting with Eugene, probably trying to reassure her after the disturbing news about Lanton's release. Do you think she'll ever tell us exactly what happened? Dr. Harding offered a small, encouraging smile. Children process trauma in their own time, Mrs. Warren. The fact that she's drawing at all is a positive sign. Just continue, being patient and supportive. After waving goodbye to the psychologist, Rachel walked to the mailbox at the end of their driveway. She opened it and pulled out the stack inside, mostly bills, a few advertising flyers, and the local newspaper. But as she was about to close the mailbox, she noticed an envelope tucked between the pages of the newspaper. It wasn't a standard business envelope. This one appeared handmade, with thick, creamy paper and handwritten addressing. At the bottom corner of the envelope was what looked like a Bible verse written in elegant script. Rachel frowned, turning the envelope over in her hands. Their church often sent handwritten notes to members facing difficult times, but something about this felt different. She walked back to the house, distracted by the mysterious envelope. "Daniel," she called as she entered the living room. "Where's Eugene?" She went to her room to rest. Daniel replied, looking up from his laptop. The session with Dr. Harding tired her out. Rachel sat beside him on the sofa, holding up the envelope. "This was in the mail. I thought it might be from the church again or something related to Eugene's recovery. But it seems odd." Daniel took the envelope, examining the handwritten address and the Bible verse at the bottom. "Proverbs 28:13, he read aloud. "Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy." He gave Rachel a puzzled look. "Not a verse our church typically uses in correspondence." Rachel opened the envelope carefully, pulling out several sheets of heavy, expensive-looking stationery. Her eyes immediately scanned to the bottom of the last page, and she gasped. "It's from him," she whispered, her fingers tightening on the paper. "It's from Derek Lanton." Daniel's expression hardened, and he leaned closer, reading over her shoulder as Rachel began at the top of the letter. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Warren," she read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "I am writing to express my deepest and most sincere apologies for the pain and suffering my actions have caused your family. It was never my intention to hurt anyone, least of all the innocent children who were placed in my care." "Care," Daniel interrupted, his voice tight with anger. "He kidnapped our daughter." Rachel continued reading. "I understand that from your perspective, what I did was unforgivable, but I hope you can find it in your hearts to understand that I was guided by what I believed was divine instruction. As Isaiah 55:8-9 tells us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Is he seriously using the Bible to justify kidnapping? Daniel's face flushed with anger. "There's more," Rachel said, turning to the second page. "I am a flawed vessel, as we all are. Romans 7:19 reminds us, For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing." The darkness that sometimes overtakes us is not who we truly are in Christ. Rachel's hands were shaking so hard she could barely read the words. "I am asking with humble heart that you consider withdrawing the charges against me. I have already suffered greatly, losing my ministry and reputation. I am truly repentant, and seek only to make amends and continue my work in spreading God's word, though in a different capacity that won't involve children's ministry." She paused, looking up at Daniel with disbelief in her eyes. "He's using religion to manipulate us into dropping the charges. He actually thinks we'd fall for this." "Keep reading," Daniel said grimly. "Let's hear what else this monster has to say." Rachel turned to the final page. "If you find it in your hearts to forgive me as Christ teaches us to forgive those who trespass against us, I would be eternally grateful. I also ask that you consider speaking positively on my behalf at the upcoming court hearing. A word from you about my reformed character and genuine remorse could make all the difference in allowing me to continue God's work in the community. Your brother in Christ, Derek Lanton." Rachel couldn't contain her rage any longer. She ripped the letter in half, then into quarters, her hands trembling with fury. "How dare he? How dare he use religion like this after what he did to Eugene, to those other children?" Daniel took the torn pieces from her hands before she could destroy them further. "We should keep this. It could be evidence of him trying to manipulate." "Witnesses? Evidence?" Rachel was nearly shouting now. "We already have all the evidence we need. He kidnapped our daughter. He told her we were dead. He kept her and those other children for years." She paced across the living room, unable to sit still with the anger coursing through her. "And now he has the audacity to ask us to help him, to speak for him in court." Daniel carefully gathered all the pieces of the letter and placed them in a folder. "This has nothing to do with religion," he said firmly. "Using Bible verses to justify his actions is beyond manipulative. It's evil." "Does he really think we'd fall for this?" Rachel continued, her voice breaking. "That a few Bible verses would make us forget what he did? That we'd actually help him avoid consequences for his actions?" "He's desperate," Daniel reasoned, his own anger evident despite his calmer demeanor. "The legal case may be proceeding slowly, but he knows that eventually Eugene or one of the other children will tell the truth about what happened. He's trying to short-circuit the process." Rachel sank back onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. "I can't believe this is happening. I thought when we found Eugene this nightmare would be over, but it's just continuing in a different way." Daniel moved to sit beside her, placing an arm around her shoulders. We'll get through this, one day at a time. The important thing is that Eugene is home with us now." Rachel leaned into her husband's embrace, drawing strength from his presence. But despite his reassurances, she couldn't shake the feeling that Derek Lanton's letter was more than just a desperate plea. It was a reminder that the man who had stolen their daughter was still out there, still trying to control the narrative, still wielding religion as a weapon. And as long as he remained free, their nightmare wasn't truly over. Rachel pulled away from Daniel's embrace, her mind racing. The letter from Derek Lanton had shaken her more deeply than she wanted to admit. She needed space, needed to clear her head and find some peace amid the chaos of emotions swirling within her. "I need to go to church," she said suddenly, standing up. "I need to pray." Daniel looked up at her, concern etched on his face. "Are you sure that's a good idea right now? You're upset." "That's precisely why I need to go," Rachel insisted. "I won't let him take this from me too, Daniel. My faith, my relationship with God. I refuse to let his perversion of religion corrupt what I know to be true and good." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. In the 2 years of Eugene's absence, their responses to grief had diverged significantly. Rachel had clung to her faith, finding solace in prayer and the community of believers. Daniel, on the other hand, had pulled away from organized religion, his faith tested beyond what he could bear. Finding Eugene had begun to bridge that gap, but they still approached spirituality differently. "I think I'll ask Eugene if she wants to come with me," Rachel added, moving toward the stairs. "She hasn't been to church since we got back. It might be good for her." "Don't pressure her," Daniel cautioned. "She may not be ready yet." Rachel paused, her hand on the banister. "I won't. I promise." She climbed the stairs and stopped outside Eugene's bedroom door, knocking softly before pushing it open. Eugene was lying on her bed, sketching in the pad Dr. Harding had given her. She looked up as her mother entered. "Hey, sweetie," Rachel said, keeping her voice light. "I'm going to church for a little while. Would you like to come with me?" Eugene's pencil stilled. For a moment, Rachel thought she saw a flicker of interest in her daughter's eyes, but then Eugene shook her head. "No, thank you. I'm tired after talking with Dr. Harding. I think I want to sleep." Rachel nodded, hiding her disappointment. "That's fine, sweetheart. You restop pharmaceutical. Dad will be here if you need anything." She returned downstairs to find Daniel organizing some paperwork at the dining table. "Eugene's staying home," she informed him. "She's tired." "I'll keep an eye on her," Daniel promised. "And I'll take care of some housework while you're gone. Maybe start dinner. You deserve a break, Rachel." Rachel smiled gratefully. Despite their different approaches to grief and recovery, Daniel had been her rock through all of this. "I won't be long," she promised, grabbing her purse and keys. The drive to First Protestant Church of Pine Hollow was short, just a few minutes from their home. As Rachel parked in the familiar lot, memories washed over her, both good and painful. This was the church where she and Daniel had dedicated baby Eugene, where they had celebrated countless Christmases and Easters, where they had built a community of friends and fellow believers. It was also the church where, over 2 years ago, they had first met evangelist Matthew, the man who would later steal their daughter. Rachel sat in her car for a moment, gathering her courage. She hadn't returned to this particular church since Eugene's disappearance, preferring to worship at a smaller congregation across town. But today, she felt drawn back to the place where everything had begun. Perhaps here she could reclaim some of what had been taken from them. She entered the sanctuary, which was mostly empty on a weekday afternoon. A few elderly worshippers sat scattered among the pews, engaged in private prayer. Rachel recognized Carmela Sandoval, who had lived in their neighborhood for decades, and exchanged a brief wave with the older woman. Finding an empty pew near the back, Rachel sat down and closed her eyes, trying to quiet her tumultuous thoughts. But before she could begin to pray, movement at the front of the church caught her attention. Her heart seized in her chest as she recognized the figure standing near the pulpit. Derek Lanton. For a moment, Rachel was sure she was hallucinating. It couldn't be him. Not here. Not in this church. Not when he was supposed to be under house arrest. But as the man turned, speaking with the church's pastor, there was no mistaking his face. Rachel froze, unable to move or breathe, as Derek spotted her across the sanctuary. His eyes widened slightly, and then, incredibly, he smiled and began walking toward her, the pastor at his side. Rachel's mind screamed at her to run, to call the police, to do something, but shock had paralyzed her limbs. Before she could react, Derek and the pastor were standing before her. "Rachel," Pastor Wilson said warmly, "it's good to see you back with us." Derek extended his hand toward her. "I am so sorry." Rachel jerked backward, rising from the pew and putting distance between them. "Don't," she hissed, her voice low but intense. "Don't you dare." The pastor looked confused, glancing between them. "Rachel, is everything all right?" "No, everything is not all right," Rachel said, her voice rising despite her efforts to control it. Several of the elderly worshippers turned to look at the commotion. "What is he doing here? He's supposed to be under house arrest." Derek's expression was a perfect mask of contrition. "I understand your anger, Rachel. I truly do. I just wanted to apologize in person for the pain I've caused your family." "Apologize?" Rachel nearly choked on the word. "You stole our daughter. You told her we were dead." Pastor Wilson looked alarmed, placing a calming hand on Rachel's arm. "Rachel, please. This is a house of worship." Rachel shook off his hand, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling the police. He's violating his release conditions." Derek shook his head, still maintaining his placid expression. "My lawyer and I were able to negotiate an adjustment to my release terms. I'm permitted to attend church services as long as I wear the GPS tracker." He lifted his pant leg slightly, revealing the black electronic device strapped to his ankle. "That's impossible," Rachel whispered, backing away further. "It's true," Derek continued. "The other families involved in the case have withdrawn their charges. They've recognized that everyone deserves a second chance. That forgiveness is at the heart of our faith." Rachel couldn't believe what she was hearing. "The other families withdrew their charges after what you did to their children?" Derek nodded, his expression solemn. "They recognize that I've changed, that I'm truly repentant. Yes, I still face charges from the state for technical violations of the law, and I'm prepared to accept those consequences. But I'm hoping that you and Daniel might also find it in your hearts to reconsider your position." Rachel stared at him, speechless with rage and disbelief. This man had orchestrated an elaborate deception, had stolen years of their lives, had traumatized their daughter so severely that she still couldn't speak about what had happened. And here he was, standing in a church, asking for forgiveness as though he'd committed some minor transgression. "Never," she whispered, backing away toward the door. "Never in a million years." Without another word, Rachel turned and fled from the church, her heart hammering in her chest. The beautiful spring day outside seemed mockingly bright, compared to the darkness that had just descended on her world. Derek Lanton, the man who had destroyed their lives, was free to walk into their church and ask for forgiveness. And somehow, incredibly, the other families had given it to him. Standing in the parking lot, Rachel pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She had to verify what Derek had told her. Had to know if it was true that the other charges had been dropped. She dialed Officer Marshall Lawson's number, praying that Derek had been lying. Marshall Lawson answered on the second ring. Officer Lawson speaking. "It's Rachel Warren," she said, her voice unsteady. "I need to confirm something. I just saw Derek Lanton at our church, and he claims the other families have withdrawn their charges against him. Is that true?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Warren, I apologize that you had to learn about this situation in such a manner. We hadn't received the official updates from the court yet, or I would have informed you. Immediately. Rachel leaned against her car, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. So, it is true. I'm afraid so, Lawson confirmed. Over the past week, the other families involved in the case have, one by one, formally withdrawn their complaints against Mr. Lanton. But why? Rachel demanded. How could they possibly forgive what he did? I can't speak to their personal decisions, the officer replied carefully. But from what I understand, Mr. Lanton's lawyer has been quite persuasive in his outreach to the families. He's framed the situation in religious terms, emphasizing forgiveness and second chances. Rachel closed her eyes, picturing the letter they had received. The Bible verses carefully selected to manipulate, the appeals to Christian charity and forgiveness. And they fell for it. Mrs. Warren, Officer Lawson said, his voice taking on a more urgent tone. I want to assure you that the state is still pressing charges against Mr. Lanton. Even without the other family's cooperation, we have enough evidence to proceed with a case for kidnapping and fraud. But will it be enough? Rachel asked. Without their testimony, will he actually face serious consequences? The officer hesitated. It complicates things. The sentence he'll receive will likely be much lighter than what we initially anticipated. Rachel felt sick. So, he'll get away with it. After everything he did, he'll serve what, a few months, a year? There is still one avenue that could ensure a more substantial sentence, Lawson said carefully. If Eugene were willing to testify about what occurred during the time she was in Mr. Lanton's custody. She's traumatized, Rachel said, her voice breaking. She can barely speak about what happened, let alone testify in court. I understand, the officer replied sympathetically. And we would never pressure a child witness. But if, with the help of her therapist, Eugene did reach a point where she felt able to share her experiences, it would make an enormous difference in the case. Rachel thanked the officer and ended the call, feeling hollowed out. The other families had abandoned them, leaving the Warrens to fight this battle alone, and their best hope for justice now rested on the shoulders of their traumatized daughter. She drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets of Pine Hollow. When she arrived, she found Daniel in the kitchen preparing dinner. The domestic normality of the scene, Daniel in an apron chopping vegetables, felt surreal after what she had just learned. Daniel, she said, her voice still shaky. I saw him at the church. Daniel turned, the knife stilling in his hand. Saw who? Derek Lanton. The name felt bitter on her tongue. He was there in our church, talking with Pastor Wilson. Daniel set down the knife carefully. That's impossible. He's under house arrest. Not anymore. Not completely, Rachel said, sinking into a kitchen chair. His lawyer negotiated modified terms. She recounted her conversation with Officer Lawson, watching as Daniel's expression shifted from disbelief to anger to despair. All of them? He asked when she had finished. All the other families withdrew their charges? Rachel nodded, miserably. Officer Lawson confirmed it. Lanton's lawyer approached them with the same religious manipulation he tried with us, and they accepted it. Daniel leaned heavily against the counter, his face pale. So, what happens now? The state is still pressing charges, Rachel explained. But without the other family's testimony, and without Eugene's, Daniel understood what she wasn't saying. The sentence will be minimal. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this new development settling over them like a shroud. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice quiet but determined. We need to talk to Eugene, to see if she's ready to share what happened. Rachel looked up sharply. Daniel, you heard what Dr. Harding said. We can't push her. It could make things worse. I'm not suggesting we pressure her, Daniel clarified. But maybe we need to explain the situation in terms she can understand. Let her know how important her voice is. Rachel hesitated. The thought of placing such a burden on Eugene's shoulders felt wrong. Yet the alternative, allowing Derek Lanton to escape real justice, seemed unbearable. "We can talk with Dr. Harding first," she suggested finally. "Get her professional opinion on how to approach this. The last thing we want is to traumatize Eugene further." Daniel nodded, returning to his dinner preparations with mechanical movements. "This can't be happening," he muttered, more to himself than to Rachel. "After everything we went through to find her, after all the prayers and searches and dead ends, he can't just walk away from this." Rachel watched her husband, noting the tension in his shoulders, the barely contained fury in his movements. "We'll fight this, Daniel. We won't let him get away with it." They ate dinner, that evening in strained silence, making awkward small talk for Eugene's benefit. Their daughter seemed to sense the tension, picking at her food without enthusiasm and answering questions in monosyllables. After Eugene went to bed, Rachel and Daniel sat in the living room, too wired to sleep, despite their exhaustion. "I keep thinking about that vanilla perfume," Rachel said suddenly. "The one I smelled in his car the day we found Eugene. Remember?" Daniel nodded. "Eugene's Christmas present, the one she wore every day." "It was one of the things that led me to her," Rachel continued. "That and the Google Maps image. And now I can't stop wondering what else happened that she can't tell us about. What did he do, Daniel? What did he do to our little girl? That's so terrible she can't even speak about it." Daniel reached for her hand, his own trembling slightly. "I don't know. And part of me doesn't want to know, but if it would put him behind bars where he belongs." Rachel squeezed his hand, drawing comfort from the contact. "We'll talk to Dr. Harding tomorrow. See what she thinks." They eventually went to bed, though sleep eluded them both. Rachel lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment she had seen Derek Lanton in the church, his placid smile, his outstretched hand, his audacity in seeking forgiveness when he had shown no real remorse. She thought of the other families who had withdrawn their charges, wondering what tactics Lanton and his lawyer had used to persuade them. Had they targeted the most vulnerable, those with the strongest religious convictions? Had they offered money, or simply played on guilt and the Christian mandate to forgive? Whatever methods they had employed, Rachel was determined they wouldn't work on her family. Derek Lanton would face justice for what he had done, even if it meant asking Eugene to confront the most painful memories of her young life. With this resolution firmly in mind, Rachel finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that their nightmare was far from over. A sharp sound jolted Rachel from sleep, a noise that didn't belong in the quiet of night. Her eyes flew open, her heart immediately racing as years of maternal instinct kicked into high alert. Something was wrong. She sat up, scanning the darkened bedroom. "Daniel," she whispered, reaching for her husband. Before he could respond, another noise, louder this time, a crash followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass, echoed through the house. Daniel was instantly awake, throwing off the covers. "What was that?" he whispered urgently. Rachel had no chance to answer. Heavy footsteps thundered through the house below, moving with purpose and making no attempt at stealth. This wasn't a cautious burglar. This was someone who didn't care about being heard. "Eugene!" Rachel gasped, terror seizing her. "Get to Eugene!" Daniel was already moving, reaching for the closet where they kept a small safe containing a handgun, a precaution they had taken after Eugene's disappearance. But before either of them could make it out of bed, their bedroom door burst open. Two men in dark clothing rushed in, their faces obscured by ski masks. They were large, muscular, moving with practiced efficiency. "Daniel!" Rachel screamed, as one of the men lunged toward her husband. Daniel attempted to dodge, trying to reach the closet, but the intruder was too fast. In a fluid motion, the masked man swung what looked like a thick wooden bat. The last thing Rachel saw before her own attacker reached her was Daniel crumpling to the floor. She tried to scramble across the bed, desperate to reach her phone on, the nightstand, but powerful hands grabbed her. She fought wildly, kicking and clawing, her mind racing with images of Eugene alone in her room. "Please," she begged, "my daughter!" A blinding pain exploded in her head as something solid connected with her temple. Light flashed behind her eyes, and then darkness rushed in from all sides, swallowing her consciousness. When Rachel came to, her head throbbed with such intensity that even the smallest movement sent waves of agony through her skull. Nausea rolled in her stomach, and her mouth felt dry and tacky. She tried to lift her hand to her head, only to discover she couldn't move her arms. Slowly, painfully, Rachel forced her eyes open. Darkness surrounded her, but as her vision adjusted, shapes began to emerge from the gloom. She was in what appeared to be a basement. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, currently switched off. The dim light came from what looked like a small window high up on one wall, covered with a heavy grate. Rachel was tied to a metal support pole, with what felt like duct tape binding her wrists behind her. Panic surged through her as memory returned. The intruders, Daniel falling, Eugene alone in her room. "Eugene!" she croaked, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. Daniel. Where were they? Were they hurt? Were they even alive? Tears sprang to her eyes as the worst possibilities flooded her mind. Before she could call out again, a door somewhere behind her opened, spilling harsh light into the basement. Footsteps approached, and a shadow fell across her. With immense effort, Rachel lifted her head. Derek Lanton stood before her, looking down with an expression of cold satisfaction. "You should have taken back the charges against me," he said, his voice lacking the pious tone he had affected in the church. "I told you to think about it. But you are one obsessive mother." Rage surged through Rachel, temporarily overriding her fear and pain. "Where is my family?" she demanded, though her voice came out slurred and weak. "What have you done with Eugene and Daniel?" Lanton ignored her question, circling around her like a predator assessing its prey. "You could have forgiven me, given me a second chance like the other parents did. That's what we religious people do." He smiled, but the expression never reached his eyes. "But you just couldn't let it go, could you? You and your husband were the only ones still pressing charges. Because we're the only ones." "Who can see through your religious facade?" Rachel spat, wincing as the movement sent pain lancing through her head. "Facade?" Lanton repeated, stopping in front of her again. "No, Rachel, my faith is very real. The difference is that I understand God's forgiveness extends to all sins, even those you consider unforgivable. Kidnapping children isn't just something I consider unforgivable," Rachel said, struggling against her bonds despite the pain. "It's a crime, and whatever else you did to those children. All that to protect your daughter and get justice for her," Lanton interrupted, his voice hardening. "And now she's back with me. I already missed her and what I used to do to her during those 2 years." Rachel's blood ran cold. "What did you do to her? And where is my husband?" Lanton laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "Always so concerned about your little family, the perfect Christian mother and wife." His expression darkened suddenly. "But when it came to extending Christian forgiveness to me, you couldn't do it, could you? You had to stand in judgment." He turned and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "I offered you a path to redemption, a chance to demonstrate true Christian charity. You rejected it. Now you'll face the consequences of that choice." With that, he left, closing the door behind him and plunging the basement into near darkness once more. "Derek!" Rachel shouted after him, her voice breaking. "Derek, don't do this, please!" But only silence answered her. Rachel slumped against the pole, tears streaming down her face. The situation couldn't be clearer. Derek Lanton had orchestrated this kidnapping to silence her and Daniel, the only remaining witnesses against him. And somehow, he had Eugene again. The thought of her daughter back in that monster's hands filled Rachel with such horror that she nearly vomited. After everything they had gone through to find Eugene, after the slow progress of healing they had begun to make as a family, it was happening all over again. And this time, Derek had no reason to keep any of them alive. Rachel knew with grim certainty that she had to escape, not just for her own survival, but for Daniel's and Eugene's as well. If she died here in this basement, Derek Lanton would truly get away with everything. She forced herself to take deep, steadying breaths despite the pounding in her head. The injury from the blow she'd received was serious. She could feel dried blood caked on the side of her face, and the room occasionally tilted sickeningly when she moved too quickly. But she couldn't afford to give in to the pain or fear. Not when Eugene's life hung in the balance. Rachel carefully assessed her surroundings. The basement was sparsely furnished, just some storage boxes in the corners, and what appeared to be a small table against the far wall. Squinting through the dim light, she could make out some objects on the table that might be her personal belongings. Her phone. If she could somehow reach it, she might be able to call for help. But first, she needed to free herself from the duct tape binding her to the pole. Rachel tested the bonds, twisting her wrists experimentally. The tape was wrapped several times around both her wrists and the pole, securing her firmly in place. It wasn't the strongest material, but in her weakened state, she didn't have the strength to break it by force alone. Rachel scanned the area immediately around her, searching for anything that might help. A sharp edge, a nail, anything she could use to tear the tape. But the pole was smooth metal, and the concrete floor around her was empty. Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but Rachel pushed it back forcefully. "Think," she muttered to herself. "There has to be a way." As she shifted position, trying to ease the growing numbness in her arms, Rachel felt something hard press against her back through her thin nightgown, something on her wrist. Her bracelet, the one Daniel had given her on their 15th anniversary, a delicate silver chain with a small cross pendant. The pendant had a slightly pointed edge where the vertical and horizontal bars met. Hope flared within her. If she could position the pendant correctly, maybe, just maybe, she could use it to tear through the duct tape. Rachel twisted her wrists behind her, ignoring the pain that shot through her shoulders at the awkward position. She could feel the bracelet under the tape, and by straining her fingers, she was able to grip the small cross pendant. With painstaking precision, she positioned the point of the cross against the tape and began rubbing it back and forth against the pole. The movement was excruciating, pulling at her injured shoulders and sending waves of dizziness through her, but she persisted. Each tiny abrasion of the tape was a step toward freedom, toward Eugene. Rachel lost track of time as she worked, her world narrowing to the steady motion of the pendant against the tape. Her wrists grew raw from the friction, and her arms trembled with fatigue. But she refused to stop. She thought of Eugene taking her first steps, proudly reading her first book aloud, the last birthday they had celebrated together before her. Disappearance. Those memories fueled her determination, driving her beyond what she thought her body could endure. And finally, miraculously, she felt the tape begin to give way. The cross pendant had worn through several layers, creating a small tear that widened with each movement. With one final desperate twist, Rachel felt the tape snap. Her right hand came free, and from there it was the work of moments to unwrap the rest of the tape from her left wrist and the pole. She nearly collapsed as she staggered to her feet, her legs weak and unsteady after hours of immobility. The room spun alarmingly, and she had to lean against the pole until the dizziness subsided. But she was free. The first crucial step accomplished. Rachel moved carefully toward the table where she had spotted her belongings. Each step was a challenge, her head throbbing mercilessly, but the sight of her phone lying among her wallet and keys spurred her onward. With shaking hands, she grabbed the phone, praying it still had power. The screen lit up. It had 15% battery remaining. Rachel nearly wept with relief. She quickly checked for reception and, to her surprise, found she had 2 bars of service, even in the basement. She immediately dialed 911, keeping her voice as low as possible as she crouched in the corner farthest from the door. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was clear and professional. My name is Rachel Warren, she whispered, her words still slightly slurred from her head injury. I've been kidnapped along with my husband and daughter. I managed to get free, but I don't know where I am or where they're keeping my family. Are you safe at the moment, ma'am? The dispatcher asked calmly. For now, Rachel replied, glancing nervously at the door. I'm in a basement. The man who took us is Derek Lanton. He's supposed to be under house arrest for kidnapping. My daughter previously. You should have his address on file. Yes, we have that information, the dispatcher confirmed. Can you see anything outside that might help us identify your location? Rachel moved carefully to the small window, keeping low. There's a window, but it's too high to see out clearly. That's okay, ma'am. We're tracking your location through cell towers. Officers are already on their way to your location. Rachel felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly buckled her knees. Please hurry, she begged. My daughter, he has her again, and I don't know what he's planning. Officers will be there very soon, the dispatcher assured her. Is there somewhere you can hide in the meantime? Rachel glanced around the basement. Not really. There are just some boxes in the corners. The door is locked from the outside, so I can't get out on my own. Stay where you are then, and stay on the line with me until officers arrive, the dispatcher instructed. Can you hear anything that might indicate where your husband or daughter might be? Rachel strained to listen, but heard nothing, beyond the pounding of her own heart. No, it's quiet. I haven't heard anything since Lanton left me here. As if summoned by her words, a sound came from beyond the door, a key turning in a lock. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat. Someone's coming, she whispered urgently into the phone. He's opening the door. Try to stay calm, the dispatcher said. Officers are less than 2 minutes from your location. But 2 minutes would be too late. Rachel looked frantically around the basement for a weapon, anything she could use to defend herself. But there was nothing within reach, and her head injury had left her too weak to put up much of a fight. The door swung open, revealing Derek Lanton, silhouetted against the light from the hallway beyond, and beside him, clutched in his grip, was Eugene. Rachel quickly tucked the phone into the waistband of her pants at the small of her back, hoping the dispatcher could still hear what was happening. You little, Lanton began, his voice tight with fury as he saw Rachel standing free. You called the police. I can hear the sirens. He brandished a large hunting knife, the blade gleaming in the dim light. His other hand gripped Eugene's arm, the girl's eyes wide with terror. Mom, Eugene whimpered, and the sound broke Rachel's heart. Let her go, Rachel said, raising her hands placatingly. It's me you want. Let Eugene go, and I'll do whatever you say. Get up and come out, Lanton ordered, waving the knife threateningly. If you make one false move, I'll end her right here, and you will never hold your daughter alive again. Do you understand? Rachel nodded, her eyes locked on Eugene's terrified face. I understand. I'm coming. Just please don't hurt her. She walked slowly toward them, her hands still raised. As she passed Lanton in the doorway, he grabbed her arm roughly, keeping Eugene in his grip as well. Move, he commanded, pushing her ahead of him up a narrow staircase. Rachel complied, praying the dispatcher had heard everything and understood the urgency of their situation. As they emerged from the basement into what appeared to be a modest suburban home, Rachel heard it, the blessed wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder with each second. The sounds of multiple vehicles, screeching to a halt outside, filled the air, followed by a voice amplified by a megaphone. Derek Lanton, this is the police. Come out with your hands up. We have the house surrounded. Rachel felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Help had arrived, but Derek Lanton wasn't ready to surrender. You've ruined everything, Lanton snarled, dragging Rachel and Eugene toward the front of the house. Through the windows, Rachel could see police cars with flashing lights. Officers crouched behind them, weapons drawn. "They know you're here," Rachel said, trying to reason with him. "There's nowhere to go. Please, just let Eugene go. She's just a child." Lanton ignored her plea, yanking them into the living room that faced the street. "You think I'm going back to prison? I had it all worked out. The other families had forgiven me. My ministry was going to continue under a new name. All I needed was for you and your husband to disappear." "Where is Daniel?" Rachel demanded, still scanning the room for any sign of her husband. "What did you do to him?" "Your precious husband is fine," Lanton sneered. "For now he is secured elsewhere in the house." Through the window, Rachel could see more police. Vehicles arriving. An officer with a megaphone repeated the command for Lanton to surrender. "Derek Lanton, release your hostages and come out with your hands up. This is your final warning." Lanton's grip on Eugene tightened, causing the girl to whimper in pain. The knife in his hand glinted as he raised it closer to Eugene's throat. "Back away from the windows," he shouted toward the police. "I want a car with a full tank of gas brought to the front door. If I see one officer approach this house, I start cutting." Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. She needed to get Eugene away from him, to create some distance between her daughter and that knife. "Please," she tried again, her voice deliberately calm despite her terror. "Think about what you're doing. You claim to be a man of faith. Is this how a true believer acts?" Lanton's eyes darted to her, momentarily distracted from the police outside. "Don't you dare lecture me about faith," he hissed. "Your self-righteous judgment is what brought us to this point. If you had just forgiven me like a good Christian should, none of this would be happening." Rachel took a small step toward him, keeping her hands visible. "Then let me make it right," she offered. "Let Eugene go, and I'll tell the police. It was all a misunderstanding. I'll say we're dropping the charges." For a moment, indecision flickered across Lanton's face. Rachel held her breath, hoping he might be considering her offer. But then his expression hardened again. "No, it's too late for that. They won't believe you now." Outside, movement caught Rachel's eye. Police officers were taking positions around the perimeter of the house, some carrying shields. Among them, she spotted a familiar face. Officer Marshall Lawson, the detective assigned to Eugene's original kidnapping case. Lanton, still holding Eugene with the knife at her throat, backed away from the window and toward the front door. "We're leaving," he announced. "You're coming with us as insurance until we're safely away." "They'll never let you leave," Rachel warned him. "The house is surrounded." "Then things are about to get very unpleasant," Lanton threatened, pressing the knife more firmly against Eugene's skin. A voice came through a loudspeaker outside, clear and authoritative. "Mr. Lanton, this is Officer Gary Wellington. We need you to release the hostages and surrender peacefully. There's no way out of this situation that ends well for you if you continue down this path." Lanton hesitated, and Rachel could see the calculation in his eyes. He was cornered, and the rational part of him knew it was over. But there was desperation there too, the dangerous unpredictability of a man with nothing left to lose. For a moment it looked like Derek might actually surrender. His grip on Eugene loosened slightly, and his expression shifted from rage to something more contemplative. Rachel held her breath, hoping against hope that he would make the right choice and end this standoff peacefully. But then his expression hardened again. He began shouting more threats, demanding that all police units retreat, that he be allowed to drive away with Eugene. His agitation grew visibly, the knife pressing more firmly against Eugene's throat. Suddenly a loud bang echoed through the room, unmistakably the sound of a gunshot. Rachel flinched instinctively and then stared in shock as Derek's form went instantly limp. The knife fell from his hand as he crumpled to the floor, lifeless. "Target eliminated," a voice shouted from outside. Police officers rushed into the house, moving quickly to secure Rachel and Eugene. An officer gently pulled Eugene away from Lantern's fallen body and guided her toward Rachel, who immediately wrapped her arms around her daughter, sobbing with relief. "You're safe now," she whispered into Eugene's hair. "You're safe. He can't hurt you anymore." Officer Wellington approached them, holstering his weapon. "Mrs. Warren," he said gently, "are you and your daughter all right? We're here to help you." Rachel nodded, still clutching Eugene tightly. "My husband," she managed to say. "Where's Daniel? Is he okay?" "We're searching the house now," Wellington assured her. "If he's here, we'll find him." Within moments, shouts came from another part of the house. An officer appeared in the doorway, supporting a battered but conscious Daniel. "Rachel! Eugene!" Daniel called out, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel turned, her heart soaring at the sight of her husband alive. Despite his visible injuries, a swollen eye, split lip, and the way he limped toward them, Daniel broke away from the supporting officer and rushed to embrace his family. The three Warrens clung to each other, tears flowing freely, their bodies trembling with relief and lingering fear. They were alive. They were together. The nightmare was finally over. Officer Wellington gave them a moment before gently interrupting. "We need to get you all checked out by medical professionals," he said. "And later, we'll need your statements about what happened here." "Is he really dead?" Rachel asked, glancing toward where Lantern's body lay, covered with a sheet, officers working around it. "Yes, ma'am. The threat has been eliminated. One of our snipers found the right moment to take a safe shot. He can't hurt your family anymore." The Warrens were escorted outside, where ambulances waited with their lights flashing. Neighbors had gathered beyond the police tape, watching with shocked expressions as the family emerged from the house. In the back of the ambulance, paramedics began attending to their injuries. Rachel's head wound required immediate attention, and Daniel winced as medics examined his ribs. Eugene appeared physically unharmed, except for a small nick on her throat, but her eyes were distant, processing the trauma. As the ambulance doors closed and they began the journey to the hospital, Daniel reached for Rachel's hand across the small space. "How did they find us?" he asked, his voice still shaky. "How did the police know where to look?" Rachel held up her wrist, showing him the delicate silver bracelet with the cross pendant. "I managed to get free using this," she explained. "The pendant was sharp enough to cut through the duct tape. Once I was free, I found my phone and called 911. Daniel stared at the small cross pendant in amazement. "That tiny cross saved our lives." Rachel nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. "We should pray," she said softly. "Thank the Lord for getting us out of this situation. It was truly a miracle that we survived this monster again." Daniel nodded, taking her hand in his. Eugene, who had been lying quietly on the stretcher, reached out and placed her small hand atop theirs, forming a circle of connection in the back of the moving ambulance. "Dear God," Rachel began, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for protecting us today. Thank you for helping us survive this horror and for bringing us back together. Please help Eugene heal from everything she's been through." She paused, her voice breaking. "And thank you that the monster who caused all this pain can never hurt us again." "Now we can truly begin to heal," Daniel added softly, "Also." The ambulance sped through the streets toward the hospital. The three Warrens held on to each other, drawing strength from their bond. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be physical wounds to heal, emotional scars to address, and a long road of recovery for Eugene especially. But they would face it together as a family. And for the first time in years, Rachel allowed herself to believe that the worst was truly behind them. With Derek Lantern gone forever, they could finally begin to rebuild their lives, one day at a time.